our discussions, but Pam Ostrowski, one of our most popular guests that we have on these discussions, author of It's Not That Simple, suggested this is a topic, especially after everybody has seen their loved ones during the holidays. So today we're going to probably be talking everything about memory care and dementia, but we're going to try to keep it on track, at least in the beginning, on the topic of is it just stress or is it dementia? But before we do that, Pam, for those that don't haven't met you on one of the previous discussions, let's get to know you a little bit better. Tell us a little bit of how you got into this space and became an expert and an author in this area.
Well, I actually got into this because my mom had Alzheimer's. She started out with 6 years of dementia, and then her symptoms became indicative of Alzheimer's. And so that was a 14-year journey. And my dad had vascular dementia in the last 2 to 3 years of his life because he had high blood pressure for decades before he was in an aging situation. So between the two of them, so vascular dementia is very different in its behaviors and its issues than Alzheimer's. So I was managing both of them. When they both passed, I wrote the book, It's Not That Simple, helping families navigate the Alzheimer's journey, because there really wasn't anything out there that talked about succinctly, if you're a caregiver of someone with dementia, what are the things that you should be paying attention to? What are the care options? What are the how do you handle the emotional roller coaster that is caregiving for someone with dementia? And so it was, and how do you communicate with them, and how do you help them live the best life they possibly can? This is not a death sentence. It is a brain disease, or dementia is actually a condition. The disease is actually vascular dementia or Alzheimer's. But the condition of dementia is the thing that we need to look at in a different light. Not that it's a bright and positive rainbows and smiley faces type of thing, but instead that you can have plenty of moments of joy and you can manage this journey better than we have in previous generations. So that's what the book is all about. And then I, work with families one-on-one, because this is a very personal journey. And people deal with things and stress differently. And I actually worry most about my clients and this topic, which is why I brought it up. And I'm like, oh my gosh, my clients are so stressed because they're caregivers and they don't know how to manage the unknown. Hello, control freaks, because
Mhm.
I was and still am. So that's where the challenge comes in, is not only do we as caregivers have stress, and our loved one who has dementia is stressing because they don't understand why things aren't working. They don't understand why you get frustrated with them. They don't understand why they're feeling this way. So there's that stress. But then there's welcome to our lives. You can't get away from stress. You can change how you respond to it. So that's kind of, how we ended up here today.
I love it. No, I love it. Okay, um, so number one, like I said earlier, we love sort of bouncing audience questions and challenges that you all might be facing out there. But let's kind of share with us. Let's get it started, Pam, in terms of
Okay.
what are you seeing? What are some solutions and what are some ways that we can navigate this journey?
Sure. So the biggest challenge is that if you live, like I lived away from my parents, right? So I lived in California at the time, and mom and dad were in New Hampshire. You can't get further away than that. And so I went home for Christmas, and I observed behaviors in both of them, but that were totally different than what I had seen maybe even 3 or 4 months earlier. And it turns out that was the beginning of mom's dementia through, exhibiting a lot of anxiety. And I thought, holidays come with a lot of stress. I don't know anybody who says, oh, the holidays are fine. I go down to Key West and drink a lot and have a great time and it's easy. But but most of us are trying to prepare meals, and we've got birthdays, we've got on top of Thanksgiving and Christmas and Hanukkah and whatever your holidays are that you celebrate, and then New Year's. And there's inevitably trying to schedule where you're going to go, where you're going to spend your time, are you going to host, what are you going to, I mean, just thinking about it makes me, it's January, stressed. So what we observe though, so we see our loved one, let's say, mom hosts, or mom even attends you hosting a holiday event, and you notice, oh, well, she's really struggling with knowing how to set the table, or she seems to be struggling with remembering where she put her hat or her purse. And immediately, and I caution everyone, don't jump to the conclusion that it's dementia. We've gotten a little dementia labeling crazy, and it's not necessarily dementia. There's many different factors that influence that, and we'll talk about that later, but that produce dementia-like symptoms. And then let's not confuse the difference between dementia and memory loss. All right, because that memory loss whole package has all sorts of reasons why that can happen. So, including medications, by the way. So I want to make sure that everybody's clear that there are differences, nuances between all of these things. And then when we talk about stress, we talk about short-term stress versus long-term stress. And each of them has a different impact on how the brain functions. So go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't want to interrupt, but I wanted
No, go ahead.
What you said, something that kind of triggered me. And I was looking again, there's lots of our positive aging community champions are in this discussion today, which is wonderful. Great resources, folks. If you're looking for something, they're there. But so when you were talking about the holidays, I just recently went to a pretty cool presentation by Susie Murphy, who's the head of Aging Well Elder Care, talking about, the Embodied Labs has this, it's this virtual reality thing so that you can feel what it's like to have Parkinson's or dementia. They use it's to develop empathy.
There's several companies that do that now. Yeah,
but
good.
the scene that they shared was this holiday celebration, and how everybody was talking around mom. Like, I mean, you could tell, like you were just, as you were describing it, everybody is kind of, they're glad to be around family, but they're sort of stressed out, and mom
Overwhelmed,
trying to prepare a meal, and it was sort of, why are you doing that, mom? This, that, and the other. So and you could feel the stress in mom who has dementia, but it was all over the place. And then, of course, like this was such a fitting vision, is where the kids have the huddle and they're mumbling and they're talking about mom in her vision, just adding to the stress there, man.
Right. Well, and the other thing is did those kids stop and say, does she really have dementia? Or is she really just struggling with, we naturally, as we age, our brains shrink, we have memory loss. Is she just naturally having memory loss due to that? But also, is the stress causing the symptoms? So I call them pseudo-dementia or dementia-like symptoms, because again, this is the thing I caution against. Adult children are very happy to say, oh, she's just got dementia. So the challenge we have with dementia and diagnosing it is that it's actually a brain condition. And that until it progresses far enough so that you could do an MRI, a CT scan, a PET scan, and soon, hopefully, blood tests to look for amyloid plaque proteins and the volume of them, until we can get to that point, in general, dementia is about many different factors. Is she struggling to get, to go to the grocery store? Is she isolating? Is she asking the same question multiple times? And could that be a hearing problem? Because hearing problems are also part of the struggle to stay aware and keep the brain stimulated. So there's so many different factors that that, I like the virtual reality, helping people understand that sometimes a really noisy environment, in a noisy environment, I will leave. So there's people who are too hypersensitive to noise. And so they're just like, they disengage.
Well,
And is that dementia, or is it,
yeah.
hearing?
And I'm also glad you brought up that the on some of our discussions with hearing loss and hearing aids, uh,
Mhm.
the this if your loved one has hearing aids, all the sound is amplified, which creates more stress. So, wow,
Exactly.
the
The brain just gets overwhelmed and it shuts
yeah,
down. And when you see that, when you see that shutdown, if you're observing your loved one and they shut down, there's a trigger. There's something happening there that you need to remove in order for them to re-engage. And putting them in a quiet room, sitting there with them, grab a family member and say, keep grandma happy, or, talk to her, whatever it might be. That's the opportunity to change the environment and be able to make it a better experience, frankly, because that's what life is about. So getting back to the stress side of this, and how it can be mistaken for dementia, and why it actually is connected to causing dementia, is that there's short-term stress, right? So think of, you have to take a test, or you have a presentation. Hello. So and you're in front of a bunch of people and you need to know all the right answers. So there's that kind of stress. There's even short-term renovations. I say that because I just did some, and trying to manage all the people and still do your work at home. I mean, that's stressful. Now, long-term stress is, people who worry about their finances. They're in a situation where they don't know where, they're going to live, or where they're, whether they're going to be able to put food on the table or be able to care for their loved ones. That is long-term stress. Another example of that would be if a loved one has a health diagnosis. That can really be difficult because that can last for months or years. And another thing that can happen, I know it's happened with my neighbors, is that they've had home damage. So, you have to move out of your house. Insurance takes forever to manage all that stuff. So basically anything long-term is, several months, that where you're feeling disoriented, disorganized, you don't feel like you've got stability, and that you're standing on your own 2 feet and you're feeling strong. And that is where your body starts to react with the hormones that actually cause the brain issues. So it can be cortisol, excuse me, cortisol. We all know that. That's one of our, you don't want to have, high levels of cortisol, because a lot of people, associate it with heart health. Well, it's also regarding affects brain health. So if you're under stress, you have cortisol. There's a couple of other hormones that it triggers, stress triggers. And what happens is that that causes inflammation, and it also causes damage to the blood vessels in the brain. And then the brain cells die, and then you start showing dementia symptoms. And so that's kind of the science behind it. The other thing, I don't know, Steve, I don't know if you do this, but when I'm stressed, I go over to my favorite bakery and I get one of those big honkin' Danishes, like the bear claw that's like 2 hands big. And I sit down with a cup of coffee, hello, caffeine, and sugar. And sugar actually crosses the blood-brain barrier and does exactly what I just said. It inflames the blood vessels, damages them, and then the brain cells die because they're not getting enough oxygen through the blood vessels. So when we're stressed, we tend to eat poorly. And when you have a loved one who's living alone and you're not keeping track of what they're eating, that can exacerbate those dementia-like symptoms to the point where it does become dementia.
man, this is great stuff.
Thank you.
Patricia Dubroff says, and how many times do we see a client that has a fast change of cognition and it turns out to be a UTI, urinary tract infection?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I have a client right now. It's a daughter, and she said, Mom called me and she was crying and she's so upset and she's obsessing about my brother. And I said, okay, this is a drastic change in behavior. I said, have you tested her for a UTI? Because she was actually hospitalized a couple months ago for a UTI. I said, she's not getting enough fluids. So we really have to keep on top of this. And it's because she's allowed to not drink her fluids. So, and that's a whole other conversation. How do you persuade people with a cognitive impairment on things to do that are good for them? So she's in that exact situation. You know, anytime you see a severe mood swing, it is usually tied to that issue of dehydration and UTI.
I, yeah, no, a misdiagnosis is a big thing. So the we
It
talked a
is.
little bit about, we know there's a problem there. Like, what are some of the solutions and some of the scenarios that you use to help your clients and their loved ones?
So the type of thing that you might have observed is that mom can't remember where things are, or she can't remember, like, oh, do I put the sugar in now or do I put the butter in now? Like, she can't really follow a recipe. Dad is appearing disorganized when he isn't usually, or they're anxious, or worrying a lot. And so when we see those kind of symptoms, we immediately think this is a change in behavior. Could be a UTI. It could be stress. Something's going on. And that's when you take the opportunity, first and foremost, to say, hey, let's sit down and talk for a second. And I actually did that with my dad. He was yelling. He's a retired lieutenant colonel. And so he can yell really well. And he was yelling at the caregivers because they were 5 minutes late in giving mom her medications, which is an unreasonable reaction to being 5 minutes late. And then I asked them to leave, and I sat him down and I said, what's wrong? What's going on? He's like, you wouldn't understand. And I said, well, you're probably right because I'm not in your situation. But again, it's compassionate response, but let's move the ball forward and say, geez, well, why don't you just talk to me? Let me know what you're thinking. And he said, this was not supposed to be the way it was going to be. I mean, this is not what we expected. This is not what we planned for, was my mom having dementia and not being engaged with him at all anymore. And I said, yeah, I understand that it is hard, isn't it? And he's like, I was supposed to be the one who got sick first. And I was supposed to be the one that got taken care of. There's an enlightening statement. So
Mm-hmm.
when we think about this, we don't realize the life change that's actually happening, especially if you have both parents alive. That's a real struggle emotionally for them. And so that stress that he was carrying, I think, really exacerbated, because it was not shortly thereafter that he started showing signs of vascular dementia, is that he really was so stressed over them that mom was having to move to another building, and he wouldn't be able to watch over her and care for her. And it was just too much for him. And so it really does make a difference. And actually, I did find some data points. There's a Swedish study that was done, and the conclusion was that people with a history of either chronic stress or depression, guys, that's another big one in the US, they were about twice as likely to be diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment or Alzheimer's disease. And that was a group of people that were between 18 and 65, and 1.3 million people were part of that study. So, you think about that's statistically valid. I hate studies where it's like, we talked with 20 people and it's like, well, it could be a lot of things, right? And then one of the other studies that I read about said that the link between Alzheimer's and stress needs to be further examined, which there seems to be continuous studies about it. But researchers believe that stress can cause inflammation in the brain, making the brain more susceptible to health problems across the board, by the way, like dementia. Stress can also lead to depression. And I didn't know this, a known risk factor for Alzheimer's. I thought a lot of my clients' loved ones actually have Alzheimer's, and then they get depression. So that I didn't think about the fact that it could actually be reversed. Did you know that, Steve?
No, but I've heard some amazing stories that of the depression of misdiagnosing depression or vice versa. Yeah.
Yeah. I just thought it is fascinating. So you've got stress, you've got depression. I mean, we have a lot of factors about our own mental health that affect and impact our brain health further on down the line. And I really think it's important that we have more initiatives focused on, how do you not be depressed? How do you learn how to respond to stress? Because let's face it, we're not going to get rid of stress in our lives, but to be able to turn around and have tools such as asking yourself, will this really matter in a year?
Mhm.
Now, if you're talking about a house renovation that didn't quite get done correctly, it probably won't really matter. Is it aggravating and frustrating? Sure, but is it worth really staying up at night? But if you have a loved one that's been diagnosed with a disease and you've got to go through treatments and try to get to the other side of that if you can, that is long-term stress. And so then you really do need some tools and some help with therapy and with the resources that are part of the positive aging group to get assistance from other people, find out what tools they have, find out what things have worked for them or their clients. And ultimately, we have to get rid of the mentality of I can't ask for help. I can do it all. We've got to have a better, it takes a village to live a life of good quality. And that ecosystem is what we can use to support all of the people who are in this situation. And then, so to talk about ways to exactly, Patricia, meditation, yoga, aromatherapy, and I will add exercise and music. Honestly, music just takes me out of everything that I'm at, right? Wherever I'm
Well,
at.
and
That's
well, yesterday we brought this up, the importance of exercise, but the in the Parkinson's world, I was just at a wonderful discussion with Parkinson's where music dance is something, so it combines music with dance, and then also they want for people with Parkinson's to use their voice too. So it's singing along and things of that nature. Um,
which is fantastic. What a great idea. But what's also interesting about that is what is it about our society where we've shifted away from any of those things? Like my parents used to go, as my dad called it, jazz band dancing all the time back in the 40s and the 50s, even the 60s. And we've evolved away from more computer and screen time and TV time and less motion and less engagement audibly. And I just think that going back to the good old days might not be such a bad idea when it comes to mental health and wellness overall.
I agree. Yeah, and somebody said Tai Chi. Patricia, Dance with PD is one of those magic discoveries from early times of art and healing. I agree that Dance with PD is great. Let's see. Doug says we have seen it a couple of times where a client seemed to be struggling with dementia-like symptoms. Okay, so this UTI thing. You know what? This is how we come up with the new discussions. We need to do a discussion on urinary tract infections. I need to get a urologist in here and talk about that. And because it seems I hear UTIs all the time as being
Yep.
a challenge. Um,
Yeah. And
uh,
it's not just the UTI is triggering behaviors and they're being misinterpreted. Like I had someone, I was talking to the husband as a client, and he said, my wife was in the hospital for a UTI. And I said, well, so she was in the hospital for UTI. When did the diagnosis of dementia happen? Because she's in memory care. And he said, well, it was at the hospital. I said, while she had a UTI? And he's like, I think so, because he's 88. So he was kind of just discombobulated by her even being in the hospital. And I said, that doesn't seem like the ethical thing to do. I said, someone who has an infection that requires hospitalization and you're going to evaluate them for their brain health at the same time. I think you guys jumped to a big conclusion here. And so she did end up getting a CT scan, and the neurologist said, there's issues. Sure, there's some neurological issues, but nothing to really be concerned about. Really,
Mhm.
she's in memory care. and and so talk about a misdiagnosis and an overreaction by the family. And so, each situation is so complex, but you look at this UTI situation and how the medical profession handles our seniors when they're in the hospital and not separate. It's just like, okay, we'll just list off a bunch of things that's wrong with you. I was like, let's not do that. Let's treat them one at a time and take a look at them holistically. So yeah, that's a thing. So yes, you should do that. And I want to know when it is because I want to listen in.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I know that this is intersecting, but I want to kind of insert this as a thought is that at this event, like in the Parkinson's world, movement is extremely important in addition to your medications. But they have really, with Parkinson's, they've really recognized, now again, these are people that still have their cognition, for the most
Right.
part, although there's a correlation between dementia and Parkinson's. But the coolest thing was at the end of this event, the people stood up and they started sharing what it's like living with Parkinson's. And they were referencing, and I go to Dance with PD, and I rock climb, and I box. These are three programs that they were talking about. And all three people, I said, "Hey, did you dance before you had Parkinson's?" "Oh no, I wouldn't do anything." And then same with the rock climbing. And so these healthy kind of stress relieving activities, what you should say, that are thrown on us because of a disease or a
Mm-hmm.
disorder, they're actually forcing us to be part of a community and live a healthier life.
Which is good for your brain,
Yeah.
right? So it all, if we can get back to that lifestyle,
Hmm.
where we were more physically active, we were more engaged. You didn't have to be best friends with everybody, but if you're out there dancing and listening to music and just enjoying yourself, happiness helps too with brain health. There's so much more to say than for it than sitting in front of the TV. I have so many clients whose loved ones sit in front of the TV, or they pretend to read a book, or they read a book, but they don't remember what they read. So they read the same page over and over again. And it's like, that's not good. All you're doing is accelerating the path here. So yeah, absolutely. I think that we can use that, Parkinson's and that initiative that seems, because there's no reason why you wouldn't do that with someone with dementia
Oh no,
either,
without a
right?
doubt. It could be
Yeah, so that it
it could be a
applies.
fun
So
activity.
there's some interesting things happening over in the chat. So actually, a lot of neurologists are not trained in dementia, and the ones that I know at very prominent hospitals, we won't name them, have actually said, yeah, he has dementia or he has Alzheimer's. That's their favorite diagnosis because it's the most common, and some have been misdiagnosed, and then they turn around and say, all right, we'll see you in a year. So they're like the worst people to give you news and then shove you out the door. But yeah, medications are a big issue. So the big factors, since they're kind of on this, thyroid issues, vitamin deficiency. So the big factors that affect and create dementia-like symptoms, but also exacerbate it, are lack of sleep, right? Anybody who's sleepy doesn't function well. Medications, absolutely 100%. And it's, we are a medication distribution,
We want the pill. Yeah.
well, yeah, just give that to me and I'll be fine. Or the doctors want you to have the pill.
Hmm.
So it's like, here, we'll just solve that symptom, but now that's a side effect. We need to give you the other drug to help you with that side effect. So you're taking 9 or 10 medications. And there's actually studies that say that most people, like 70% of people over the age of 65, are on more than 10 medications. I forget the exact statistics, so please don't quote me on that, but
Yeah.
look up people over 65, how many medications are they taking? It's ridiculous. So you don't think that affects your how your brain functions? Is it dementia? Probably not. It's medications. So then on top of that comes stress. Okay, so we kind of got off topic, but that's fine if you guys are cool with it. And then lack of exercise. So your body needs blood. So that's one of the reasons why dancing and moving and singing, it gets the blood flowing from toe to tip of head. And because of that, your brain's like, oh, oxygen, we could use some of that. And as a result, you've got all this cocktail, if you will, of happiness, movement, blood flow, oxygen. It's a win-win-win-win-win. And but when you look at people who don't exercise, the TV watchers, the book readers, you see a lot of issues with mobility and obesity, frankly. Like my brother has Parkinson's. He's been obese all of his life. And it's like, well, this really isn't a surprise, because he also has poor nutrition. And so then you get onto the nutrition and hydration side of things. So with nutrition, I mean, we mentioned, the fact that sugar passes the blood-brain barrier. Alzheimer's is called type 3 diabetes. You're looking at high-fat foods. Everything that's bad for your heart is bad for your brain. It's all connected. So, we've been giving advice for decades about this. And yet you look at the levels of obesity and they're going up, not down, the more aware we are of how bad it is for us. So it's a bizarre dynamic. We humans are weird. And so if you look at so you're looking at nutrition, then you look at hydration. As we get older, we drink less. And I don't mean alcohol. But alcohol is also considered a stress reliever. Well, I've had a long day. I'm just going to have a couple glasses of wine and kick back. Right, Steve?
Oh, yeah, no, but I mean, some of the contributing factors is like this all gets really messy. If you've got urinary problems, if you I mean, yeah, it's like as a male getting close to 60, it's sort of like I know I have to stop anytime I walk by a bathroom, I have to stop at it. And so that part of you is sort of like, oh geez, I don't want to pull over this, that, and the other, so I'm not going to drink as much. And then you get dehydrated.
Yeah, exactly. And then what
Mobility,
happens?
I never thought about how mobility can contribute that. Somebody who it's difficult for them to get up, it's sort of like, okay, well, like I'm only going to get up a couple of times to go to the bathroom, so I'm not going to drink that much.
Yeah, yeah. And interesting question from Noli, that is it difficult to get men to drink water? So they don't have to drink water. They just I could try to correct people on they just need to drink fluids, right? So you can have iced tea, you can have coffee, you can have lemonade, a cranberry juice, preferably not orange juice because it's got a lot of sugar in it. But any of the non-low sugar things, but beer not good. Thanks, Emily. But the idea here is non-alcoholic fluids that have low sugar. And so by doing that, so what happens scientifically is that when the brain is dehydrated, so you see the pictures of the brain and there's all these little folds and stuff, but what it does is it just shrinks in on itself. Well, when the brain shrinks in on itself, the functions that happened right here that are now folded in don't work as well or don't work at all. So when you rehydrate the brain, then everybody starts functioning better. So the first thing you should do if you see someone who's struggling cognitively, give them a glass of water. That's the fastest and quickest way. And we're talking, 8 to 16 ounces. And then I tell all of my caregivers, make sure that you tell the care community that your loved one needs to drink 48 ounces. And that's the minimum. 48 ounces of fluids a day. And most of the caregivers don't even, it's like, well, I didn't know there was a number. And it's like, that's going to keep them at least stable. But my dad, to your point, Noli, is that my dad would say, well, my dad always told me water rusts your pipes. And I'm like, yeah, and he died what age? So my dad ended up living till 93 and a half. So, it's kind of counterintuitive. But yeah, he didn't drink a lot of water. And then frankly, at my mom's memory care, they would line it up. They would have water, cranberry juice, lemonade, and iced tea. And then fortunately, she would drink them all because she thought she should empty the glass, right? That was that mentality of emptying. And but a lot of other people, would just drink one of the 4 options. And those were all 6-ounce glasses. So by the time she was done, she drank 24 ounces of fluids. Now that created some bathroom runs, but but yeah, fluids, fluid intake and hydration are so very important to brain health. And yet, we jump to the conclusion, well, mom's not doing well. And it's like, wait, there might be some other things going on here, which is really why it's important for us to look at the whole picture and knock off the easy ones. Is she getting exercise? Is she drinking properly? Is she eating properly? Is she getting socialization? Not everybody likes people. So I call it stimulation, right? Because if you sat at a park and you watch the dogs and the kids and the people, you don't have to say hello to anybody, but you got your stimulation.
And you don't
So,
feel because again, loneliness and isolation, we all know now that this is unhealthy. And but that doesn't mean that you have to go to parties and play bingo and this, that, and the other. I like what you're saying, Pam, is that just being around other people and seeing movement in the world
and hearing, smelling,
yeah.
tasting, and visual are ways to be stimulated. You don't have to actually play bingo. You could watch it. Yeah.
A
So there's a
reminder.
question. Sorry, go ahead.
A reminder of coffee and tea are diuretics that will dehydrate you. Somebody mentioned that. I'm guilty of that one in that, I'll be drinking coffee all day and I'll start feeling lightheaded, and I got to balance it with some other fluids that are going to hydrate
Right,
more.
right, right. We don't want them to drink 48 ounces of coffee,
Mm-hmm.
but I would rather them drink something
Then
so that you build that habit, right, of picking something up. And I always tell people, especially with anyone who actually does have cognitive impairment, it's got to be a clear, this is as deep as a color I would go. So you can see that there's water. Let's see if you can do
Oh
this.
yeah,
See,
no, that's
there's
great.
water in it. So many people don't, they use the metal containers because it keeps stuff hot or cold. And I'm
Yeah.
like, someone with dementia doesn't, yeah, exactly. Someone with dementia doesn't know that there's fluid in there. It's just a cup. So
Hey,
you have to have things where they can see the fluid. And that can be a plastic glass, doesn't have to be glass itself, but that kind of thing is so important and we don't think about.
I know it's a little bit off topic, but it's still on topic. But Cheryl has a heart-wrenching challenge that she's throwing out there. Okay, if I read this because
Yeah.
I think it would be great if you provided some response, but we got so
Sure.
many.
I've had a client with this
Okay.
situation.
So what Cheryl says is, I've got a 94-year-old friend in a memory care community. She's been very combative. This was never her personality. She is fighting staff and other patients. The facility talked about calling the police on her. What conversation should be had once the police is brought up? Any food for thought on this one?
Yeah. So the first thing to do is have a conversation with the director of nursing and the executive director of the community, because it depends on who's actually threatening to call the police. I've both observed this when in mom's memory care where the police were called. All they're going to do is file a report and say, this person's in memory care. It's your job to make sure that you moderate those behaviors. So the idea would be that you have the conversation with the director of nursing. The personality changes, that does not sound like Alzheimer's. It sounds like vascular dementia or Lewy body dementia. Both of those have combative behaviors in them. And as a result, there should be medications that should help her. Whether it's a trazodone, an Namenda, and just to be clear here, so I've spoken with some Alzheimer's physicians and neurologists, and a lot of times people say, well, and I'm one of them, Aricept and Namenda don't really work after mild cognitive impairment or even early, maybe a little bit with early early Alzheimer's or early dementia. But what they're being used for more so now is leveling everybody out. So they've seen that one of the side effects is actually that there's fewer behaviors. So unfortunately, in this situation, this individual probably will need to be medicated, at least temporarily, because I always talk about the emotional roller coaster, and the reason why you have an emotional roller coaster as a caregiver is because your loved one is doing this with you, right? Or they started. They're good one day, they're bad the next. They're good for a week, they're bad the next. And bad and good can be very relative. My mom would be awake and alert and feeding herself one week, and then the next week she'd be sleeping all the time and they'd have to feed her. So, but in this case, it's behavioral. And so and especially because of Lewy body and vascular dementia, the doctor should be involved. They should have a doctor on call at the facility, at the community. And you need to have a conversation with those three individuals to say, we need to moderate her behaviors, and but not let her just like fall asleep, right? That there's over medication, right? And that can be bad too.
Yeah. And so I don't know if this will be helpful, Cheryl, but I so you can look it up online in Europe. They have these dementia villages, and I was at a conference. It was the Aging Life Care conference, and he'd come over from the Netherlands. He was the founder of this village, and he spoke to us about how wonderful these dementia villages are, and to just imagine this, it's like a small town with 20 residences and a town square and stores and things of that nature, where people with dementia can go out and go on a walk. I mean, and so one of the things that he said to us to kick this off was very effective for me. He said, "Look, everybody in this room is healthy. You came here to this conference to learn." I go, "I want you to imagine if I lock the doors to this large, wonderful conference room where 300 of us are gathering together. We've got food, we got companionship, this, that, everything. If I lock those doors, how long do you think that all of us, educated and rational, would be trying to figure out how are we going to get out of this room?" And he said that when they transformed a traditional nursing home taking care of people with dementia into
memory care.
memory care into this village, that he said that there's almost no aggressive and behavior because
they have space.
Yeah, and you're still living that life. And so I bring this up to you, Cheryl, in terms of maybe it might require some additional creative thinking to just sort of what's the root cause, and
well, and I call them triggers, right? And there's many different triggers. So your loved one there may be a person in your community, and this is the downside of what you just said, which is being enclosed in a community where you're stuck with the same people for a while at least, right? It could be 3 or 4 years, it could be 3 or 4 months. But the people this is what we were talking about earlier, Steve, you're co-mingling with different levels of function, which can be really annoying. And so you've got people who are triggering the other people, and you've got a relatively small space. So I only recommend memory care communities where there's plenty of room to walk around, where you don't see everybody all the time. You can go outside into a safe space. And many of them are like stacked up. They're like apartment buildings with a little strip of grass out back. And there's no way for these individuals to actually be human and have a quality of life. So I totally agree with the Netherlands model. And I think that we end up doing things in a way to house people when in reality they're not, it's not amenable to the best quality of life and to be as independent as possible. So then the other aspect of it is that you want her to feel like you're being empathetic or compassionate to her situation. And so what's interesting is, how did you hear about this? So have you witnessed the actual situation where she's gotten violent? Or, by the way, if the caregivers are, someone's at my door, I apologize. Perfect timing.
Yeah.
So, they if you don't witness it, caregivers. So my mom had sores in her mouth from agitation from her dentures. So a caregiver tries to put her dentures in and she puts her arm up. Is that being combative? Or is that her, because she couldn't speak anymore? Is that her way of, being able to communicate, hey, I can't do anything, right? I don't want you to do that. I want you to stop. So I would also get more details as to, is there one individual that she's attacking, or is it that, is it more that she's just hitting everybody, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then if a caregiver tries to restrain her, well, if I grabbed you, Steve, and held you back,
Oh no. Yeah.
would you have what kind of reaction would you have? And they blame the dementia, but that's the problem, right? Is that it's the conditions that create the environment for the violence. Now, some people just react to everything, right? And so that's when the medication would have to come in. But it doesn't sound like we know enough details yet
No.
to figure out what's triggering that. So,
Hopefully, Cheryl, those are some things. My heart goes out to you there. The now a few questions about your the what you do and your consulting, and Noli, and I'll bring up your website here and I'll share it with folks. But so it's Alzheimer's Family Consulting, and I guess you work and help people problem solve, exactly like we're doing with Cheryl's
right,
situation, but
right.
you're their advocate in the
Well,
back.
I help guide them. So one of the biggest challenges with this journey is that people don't have a path forward. If they go to a support group, it's everybody piling on. Well, my mom did this and my dad did this and my spouse can't do that. And then you walk out and you're so depressed because you didn't get any answers. You didn't get any guidance. All you got to hear was people piling on about how miserable this disease can be. My job is to provide, okay, 2 or 3 steps. What are we going to do this week or this month or this quarter, so that you feel like you're moving forward in this journey in a positive way that increases the quality of life for both of you in this situation. And so I think someone had asked, am I paid for by Medicare? I
Yeah.
am not. My services are not paid by Medicare. It is private pay. But that being said, I have communities and other businesses that when they refer me, they say, we will pick up the first hour or 2 hours, or pick your favorite number, of work with Pam, because we're partners, right? And so what I do for them helps them be more successful with my referral company. So there's ways to help the individuals pay for my consulting services. But there's no insurance that pays for it. I am a tax deduction if that's helpful, but but yeah, that's how that kind of works. Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Let me question. Of course, we go down rabbit holes here, and I brought up the Dementia Village, and somebody said, I've heard of villages. Is this something different? And it is. Okay, so I'll drop 2 links into chat. So one link is a CNN article and broadcast on the Dementia Village in the Netherlands, where you can learn about that. And if you just type into Google Dementia Village, you'll find plenty of really cool stuff. But then the villages that you're referring to, which again are great, is the Village to Village network. And this is a grassroots initiative of neighbors coming together to support aging in place. And there is a lot that is being done in these villages globally related to dementia. It's just not a dementia village. So I'll drop both of those links into chat for folks if you're interested in that.
I wanted to give a call out to Marjorie because she's spot on that the label that care communities across the board and medical professionals use is behaviors, right? And she said a lot of times it's miscommunication or misunderstanding, because if if you don't look at the situation and you just look at the person who's like totally riled, because once you get someone riled up who has dementia, it's really hard to take them down a notch. And you have to get them out and get them into the room or take them outside or get them into an environment where you're disengaging and removing them from the environment that's stimulating them. And this miscommunication and misunderstanding, I think if we could do a presentation to those in the senior profession about that, to say you need to change the way you look at this. They're not behaviors. This has more to do with miscommunication and misunderstanding. Like my mom's situation, she had sores in her mouth, for God's sakes, and you were trying to shove dentures in there. Yeah.
Yeah, no, nobody's gonna, but because mom can't communicate like she
Right.
could, before, it's acceptable. Okay. I looked at the clock. We're almost to an hour.
I know. Our time always goes quickly, Steve.
Yeah, here's one comment here. I found that due to anxiety with her dementia, that my mother would not utilize outside courtyards or open spaces in her memory care because she was afraid of getting lost or being somewhere unfamiliar, or because her knees hurt and she didn't want to walk very far.
Yeah.
Really kind of speaks to that. I mean, let's face it, like what we all need is a customized, we need people looking after us and paying attention to our own unique things that make us a human.
And the way that memory care in particular says that is, oh, we'll take your intake form. It's 8 pages long. It has all the details about your loved one. And it's like, and who, I always coach my people when they interview places. And it's like, all right, well, who reads that? And
Mhm.
how often do they look at it? And do they modify it as this person's disease progresses? Can we modify it so that they actually pay more personal attention to this situation versus that? And in this individual's perspective or situation, it's better for them to have a caregiver take her out, or you, or someone whom she knows, where she's going to feel safe and just sit. You do the same thing with animals that are scared. You sit in that environment. You don't go walking around everywhere. You just get outside the door and sit and be safe for 30 minutes. And then you go back inside. And that way she's not working out her knees or anything. And then if a caregiver says, once you've got her acclimated to the environment, a caregiver should go to her and say, you know what, let's hop in this wheelchair and I'll take you around for a spin. I need to get some fresh air. That's the way you're supposed to position that. Not, do you want to go outside? That's the way you ask your dog that. You don't ask your mother that.
Yeah.
And so, it's a matter of wording and acclimatizing would be the way the British would say it. Acclimating to the environment or the situation so that they don't feel scared, and you do it in small bites. You don't just take them out there and go, see, it's all well and fine. And it's like, they're scared to death. Yeah.
Man.
So that would be what I would do.
This is great, Pam. A another great discussion. And
Thank you,
I
Steve. Thanks
think
for the opportunity.
I think we have 3 or 4 additional ones, so we'll make sure to get you on the calendar here. This is the way it always is. But I'm really going to work on a discussion on UTIs. I think that's absolute. We've got a discussion coming up. I don't have the date off the top of my head on sepsis, which again, I just blown away at the incidence of death and just close calls related to sepsis.
Yeah.
You got a
Yeah.
great
And they
one.
come home from the hospital, they go back to memory care if they can't communicate, or they just like rubbing their tummy or whatever, or they're, the community, there might be a director of nursing, there may be an LPN on staff, but if there's not, there isn't anybody to diagnose that until really bad situations happen. And that's where now it's a crisis. It's no longer just taking care of it with antibiotics. So yeah, it's a big deal.
All right, this is great, and thanks to everybody. I mean, Pam, you're wonderful, but I mean, what I love is when we get the feedback and the questions
Interaction.
and Cheryl's question. I mean, it's sort of like I love hearing these real life stories because that's how we kind of transform us sort of preaching a way of thinking to, okay, here's a real life scenario. Let's figure it out.
Yes, I agree. And
So
it moves everybody forward, which is like my mantra. We're not trying to just push information. It's about as an ecosystem, being able to help each other with understanding situations and resolving situations. So important. Thank you guys so much for filling up the chat and asking questions and giving us scenarios. It is what I live for these days.
Yeah,
So
yeah, me
thank you.
too. So thank you, Pam, and
You're
we'll
welcome.
see you all. We'll see you all soon.